Hello, everyone. Welcome for this expected session by John Croft. I just announced we will record, and this recorded will be in YouTube. If you don't feel comfortable to have your image there, please, you can turn off your camera. And John will talk, and after that, we will open for questions and comments. Okay, great, John. Welcome. I think I don't need to introduce you.
No, probably not. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you here. And
everybody.
Yes.
Confestival, this conference. And
someone is recording something else. Well, the mathematics of dragon dreaming is a section that is a new one, and what I will do is I will screen share. I've got 6 pages of slides to go through and show you some introductory formula, but there is a lot more available on the mathematics that we'll talk about as we go through. So just to begin, I want to share a screen. There, can people see that?
Yeah.
Good. So this is the Mathematics of Dragon Dreaming projects. And there is the old dragon, the rainbow serpent, as he was, with the eye of the dragon to the left and the wings of the dragon to the right. So that's from the dreaming to the doing. In terms of the mathematics of dragon dreaming projects, what we find is that a quotation, it's a quotation from Galileo, and it says, "The universe cannot be read until we've learned the language and become familiar with the character in which the universe is written. It is written in mathematical language. And mathematics, according to Galileo, is the language with which God has written the universe." Another quotation I want to share in terms of the mathematics of dragon dreaming. Mathematics, rightfully viewed, possesses not only truth, but a supreme beauty. Beauty cold and austere, like that of sculpture, without the appeal of any part of our weaker nature, without the gorgeous trappings of painting or music, yet sublimely pure and capable of a stern perfection, such as only the greatest art can show. The true spirit of delight, the exaltation, the sense of being more than man, which is the touchstone of the highest excellence, is to be found in mathematics as surely as in poetry. Bertrand Russell. The third quotation I want to share with you is that mathematical concepts turn up in entirely unexpected connections. More often, they often permit an unexpectedly close and accurate description of the phenomenon in these connections. It's by Eugene Wigner, who's an atomic physicist, who wrote an article on the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematical reasoning in understanding our world. So if mathematics is capable of these things, then you'd expect that mathematics is capable of explaining dragon dreaming too. And I want to just present a very brief and beginning explanation of how mathematics relates to dragon dreaming. Oh dear, that's... I'll just try and edit that just a moment because it's a little bit high. Okay, try it again. In Dragon Dreaming, there is a Kurt Lewin, who's a researcher, who's the father of action research theory, has proposed that it is not nature or nurture which is the ultimate determinant of our behavior. Some people say it's our human nature. Some people say it's the way the environment has nurtured us. But Kurt Lewin said, no, it is not either one or the other. Rather, it's an interaction of the two, of both nature and nurture. And this interaction of the two creates the first dimension in Dragon Dreaming. So the formula here is your behavior, B, is equal to a function of the individual and the environment, where B is the behavior, I is the individual nature, which is your inborn or your internalized tendency, your habits. E is the external environment, and F is the mathematical function that determines their interaction. It's the dialogue process that occurs. So there's the basic formula for the first dimension in Dragon Dreaming. This is a process of dialogue between the individual person and their environment. And it establishes the first and most fundamental primary dimension of Dragon Dreaming, of the spiral wheel, which projects can make an individual person's dream come true. At the start of a project, it is the individual factors that tend to predominate. It tends to be your own nature or your education. The individual will contribute their dreams and their intentions, their vision for the future, and the purpose and the initial understanding of their skills and knowledge and capacities, and hopefully their wisdom in making the project a success at the beginning of the project. But as the project proceeds, the environmental factors tend to take a greater and greater importance. So that boundary between the individual and the environment moves backwards and forwards, depending upon the inputs and outputs on each side of that line. In fact, we can say that as you every skill that an individual possesses, all of your skills, even your skill in walking, has been the result of a completed project. You've been doing projects all your life. You're doing projects now in listening to this session. So projects come from the Greek word projectos, which means to throw forward. And what you throw forward is a vision for the future. And that is the nature of the project. And the project is determined by your behavior, which is a function of both the individual and the environment. Equally, in a successful project, you need to mobilize resources from the environment, other people, material resources, finances, new ideas, new skills and abilities. In successful projects, the environment will be transformed by the project, just as you will be transformed too. It will not be the same place after the project as it was before. And Lewin's formula, the formula above, provides us with this first dimension. But there's a second dimension that is involved in Dragon Dreaming. And this second dimension comes from Paulo Freire. Here we can say the behavior is a function of theory and practice, where T is the espoused theory that will govern the action, and P is the nature of your practice. And we'll talk about this more and more during this presentation. Freire showed that just as theory without practice is irrelevant, so practice without theory is blind. It's the dialogue between theory and practice that creates the praxis of conscientization. And it's that which will lead to the liberation and empowerment and humanization of the people involved. So that's the second dimension. B equals FT times P. But the interesting thing is about this is that there is always a cognitive dissonance. Now, a cognitive dissonance is a mental stress or discomfort. It's experienced in situations where there is one or more contradictory belief, idea, or value that you hold at the same time. And it's performed at the same time as an action that is contradictory to one or more of these beliefs, ideas, or values. And the persons are, in fact, confronted. You are confronted by new information that conflicts with your existing beliefs, ideas, and values. The reason why for this is that none of us know everything. And so there is always a degree of cognitive dissonance there. And what we find, cognitive dissonance is present in your theories because they're only ever partial representations of a much larger and much more complex reality. Your description of your environment always differs from your prescription for the environment, for that situation. And it's that difference between description and prescription that produces the motivational tension for an individual to do the project. What you find is you describe reality, and then out of that description, there is a prognosis, what will happen that you expect. And your project is a way either to help that to happen or prevent it from happening. For example, at the moment, we are facing climate change, and you can see the symptoms of climate change all around the world. The description is that the more greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere, the higher the temperature will be. The prognosis is if we keep doing that, or even if we keep the current trend working, the prognosis is that we're going to see mass extinctions on this planet, and it's going to be very, very hard for our children and our children's children. So the prescription that we need is that we need to reduce greenhouse gases. So that comes out of the cognitive dissonance between our behavior and our theories. Now, dissonance has a formula. Dissonance is equal to practice minus theory where V is a value agreed by the members of the project that can indicate there'll be a blockage in one stage of the project caused by the fact of the dissonance. So, for instance, if you don't see what is emerging, if you don't see what's happening, emerging, you've got a blockage in the dreaming stage. And that blockage in the dreaming stage will produce a failure in being able to discern wisely. It'll produce a failure in your awareness, and it'll produce a failure in your motivation. So that's where the blockages occur as a result of the dissonance in the dreaming stage. If you don't say what you think, you get a blockage in the planning. You need to say what you think. If you don't say what you think, this will produce failures in gathering information. It will produce failures in considering alternatives, and it'll produce failures in your strategies. So, if you don't do what you say, that produces blockages in the doing stage. And the blockage in the doing stage will produce a failure in testing or trialing your project. It'll produce a failure in the implementation of your project, and it'll produce a failure in management and administration. If you don't recognize what you do, this will produce a blockage in celebration. And this blockage in celebration will produce a failure in being able to monitor the progress of your project and return to the implementation to correct your project. It'll produce a failure in you being able to acquire new skills, and it'll produce a failure in the results for the project. So dissonance is behind the blockages in dragon dreaming. Now, the next thing I want to look at, the next application of the mathematics, is the whole question of force field analysis. A force field analysis looks at the forces determining the environment or individual factors that are producing the rate of change. The rate of change is R. That's the force that is either driving the project forward to a desirable goal, or helpful forces, or they're blocking the movement towards the goal, which are hindering forces. And because this is proven so useful in social sciences, social psychology, organizational development, we've adapted the force field into dragon dreaming. And we can talk about the force field process in the questions if people are interested in following up later. Force field analysis too has a mathematical formula. And the mathematical formula for force field is quite complex. R is the rate of change, is equal to a function of helpful factors minus the hindering factors, where the number of factors is multiplied by 10. The reason for that is R is the rate of change, as I said, but N, HE, is equal to the number of positive factors in the force field. Now, if the numbers of positive factors in the force field, this depends upon a method of scaling both helpful and hindering factors so they can be considered mathematically. And in dragon dreaming, we generally use a scale from 1 to 10 as a subjective scale to qualify them, which is why we say that the denominator is multiplied by 10. When R is 1, the rate of change is 0, and the system won't change. When R is positive, in other words, where R is greater than 1, then the environment and the individual factors, the theory and practice, will be helpful to your project. But when R is negative, in other words, where R is less than 1, then the environment and individual factors of theory and practice will stop your project from happening, and things need to change. So you can use this force field analysis as a very powerful tool in helping you design your strategy. It will show you which factors you can do, because there's a song that goes, accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. If you can find a way of making the positive factors in the force field even more positive, and if you can find a way of weakening the negative factors, then that will increase the likelihood that your project will work successfully. So there's a lot of other factors that can be used and treated mathematically in dragon dreaming. And I just want to list these now. We can discuss these in the discussion that follows. It's possible, for instance, that you can actually treat the Karabirit of a dragon dreaming project mathematically by looking at the numbers of people involved and their skills, and that will help you as a function determine which tasks are going to be easiest to do. A second factor that can be treated in dragon dreaming is motivation, and the motivation curves that people have seen in dragon dreaming presentations that I showed, where the motivation starts off very slow and it accelerates and accelerates until it gets into overshoot and collapse. And when a curve gets into overshoot and collapse, the collapse stage will lead to, first of all, denial. People won't realize that the collapse is occurring. They think they're still in high motivation, but then they start to bargain. It begins to be a compromise. In a compromise, you don't get everything you want. And the bargaining stage is the beginning of a win-lose. It's a beginning of a win-lose stage in a project. And if the win-lose stage continues, then what happens is the motivation begins to go below 0, and then you get freeze, fight, and flight. People freeze, they say, come on, let's keep going, let's keep going. or they fight among themselves about the particular part of the project, or people just leave the project. And when that happens, that will lead to the most negative of all stages, which is a stage of depression. What we need to do is to realize that these curves, these mathematical curves, can be changed. And the way to overcome that win-lose game that happens in the planning and the doing stages of projects is that immediately you become aware that there's a fall in the motivation, we need to celebrate. And celebration, if we build the celebration in, immediately we become aware that the motivation is falling, we can build permanent high motivation in our projects. The other question then too is how to build sustainability in a project, because as I said, if it continues just on a positive feedback loop, that will lead to an overshoot and collapse. What we need to do is to realize that in every project, there is a point of inflection. And that point of inflection will happen if you want to build a sustainable project where the positive feedback loop gets replaced by a negative feedback loop, and that negative feedback loop builds out towards long-term permanent sustainability in your project. What we find with this is that the amount of work you need to do for the project rises and is highest at that point of inflection. If the work in a project continues to increase after the point of inflection, then it's likely that you're building an overshoot collapse project and not a sustainable one. The final one I want to talk about briefly is the mathematics of dragon dreaming and how it relates to living systems theory. Living systems theory is a theory in which feedback is absolutely central. And as we know in dragon dreaming, there's feedback stages of revision in the dreaming stage. There's a feedback of reconsideration in the planning stage. There's the feedback of re-evaluation in the doing stage, and there's the feedback of reflection in the celebration stage. So those are absolutely important. And in conclusion, therefore, we can say, in conclusion, this has only been an initial explorational study of some of the mathematical aspects of dragon dreaming. And if dragon dreaming is to take its rightful place as a means of building the win-win-win culture of personal growth, discovering how we're much more than our self-prejudiced view of who we think we are, of building community, strengthening the communities of which even we are unaware of we may be a part of, and service to the earth, working for the well-being and flourishing and regeneration of all life. If we are to do that, then the study of the mathematics of dragon dreaming needs to continue. Thank you. Questions?
John, just a second. I'd like to remind people arrived later, we are recording. If you don't want to appear in that, because this video will be in YouTube, you can just turn off your camera. And also ask if you make a question, you open your microphone, but then you please mute your microphone after your talk. You can also raise your hands for we know who will talk and keep some order. Thank you. So I believe
no questions.
It is some dense information. Maybe you could guide the pit carry.
Good idea.
We reconnect with our information. Yeah?
Exactly. So, dear people, take a breath. Shut your eyes. Listen to the sound of your breathing. Feel the fact that the air you breathe in is cooler than the air you breathe out. See if you can feel that temperature difference. And that temperature difference can be treated mathematically. It's energy that comes from the sun. And by breathing out, you're returning that energy back into the environment from where it came. So you're part of that energy flow. See if you can actually feel the pulse of your heart. You might feel it in your neck, in your arm. You might even feel it as the squeak of blood as it passes through your ears. It's like a drum that's beating out the seconds of your life. And that drum started beating only 19 days after you were conceived. And it'll be with you until you take the last breath in this lifetime. And when it feels right, open your eyes and see the colors of the world around you and hear the sounds that you're listening to. Wow. Thank you. Questions?
Good morning, or good evening in my case. I'm zooming in from California on the west coast of North America. And my question is very personal because one of the things that was outside of all of this scientism of like looking at the world in a really materialist way. So I love mathematics, and I've spent a lot of time in a very rigid view of the world. And being able to be open to dragon dreaming was also me being open to a new way of looking at life in every way. So a few hairs on the back of my neck are like, oh, wait a second, what are we doing here? We're going to quantify this beautiful thing that's so part of the natural flow of nature and has like tacit and intuitive knowledge in it. So I guess it's a more philosophical question. I'd like to know, how did you come, and I missed the very beginning, but maybe you explained it. How did you come to decide that mathematically it's important to, I see it for the effectiveness of the project, but it just makes me nervous. And
I understand.
you do? Okay, good.
And it relates to the question of quantity and quality. That there are quantitative issues that we need to speak about, but there's also qualitative issues. And both quantity and quality can be treated mathematically. The other thing too, and it's a quotation that I've used in a number of dragon dreaming workshops. How do you know where you are going? If you don't know where you are now, if you don't know the direction you're pointed in, if you don't know how fast you're traveling, if you don't know where the steering wheel and the brake and the accelerator are, and if you can't see through the windshield of the vehicle you're traveling in, And then what happens? If you can't answer any of those questions, you're likely to run off the road and have a major accident. And there are so many projects that run off the road with accidents. For example, I often say in Dragon Dreaming, of every 100 dreams, 90% of projects get stuck in the dreaming stage. They get stuck there. They're blocked in the dreaming stage. And so we need to find a way of understanding what is the source of the blockage. The second stage is 90% of projects don't work according to plan. And I believe the reason for that is that we have a wrong idea about the nature of intelligence. The world is not only stranger than we imagine, it is in fact stranger than we can imagine. But what happens is, because we have the faulty idea about intelligence, we think intelligence is something we've got in the head, and it's not a thing. Intelligence is not a thing. It's a process that connects. It connects us to the world and connects the world back to us. So true intelligence is a circular process. But a circle is a mathematical shape. And it has a boundary. And energy and information and matter flow across that boundary. It flows into the project and flows out from the project. And that can be treated mathematically. 90% of projects that are done don't last longer than 4 years. They never achieve true sustainability. You know, it's been found, if you look at all the people who have ideas about business startups, only 1 in 10 will be there in 4 years' time. And the reason why is they forget the fourth step, the process of celebration. And the process of celebration is built around the reflection of feedback. And that feedback can be treated mathematically. So if we look at those statistics, we start with 1,000 dreams. We finish up with 100 plans. We finish up with 10 of those plans that are in fact done. And there's only 1 of them 4 years later. And that is the way the world is working at the moment. What a waste of dreaming. A huge waste of dreaming. And people know that. People know that in the general world in which we live, the modern capitalist, the world that you were talking about, Pia, they know that in that world, only 1 in 1,000 of their dreams will come true. And so what they do, they give up their dreams. They give up dreams. And so what we find, you can look, in peak hour traffic, go out into just about any city in the world and look into the faces of the people at peak hour traffic. And what you will see will be in the face of the average person, a look of quiet despair, of people who've given up their dreaming. They don't believe their dreams will come true. They don't believe it's possible to change the world. And as Aboriginal people say in Australia, if you lose your dreaming, you've lost part of your soul. So we need to recover our dreams. And for this recovery, I believe mathematics is only one tool, but it's an important one. So I celebrate maths. What has happened in our world is a lot of people suffer from dyscalculia. Dyslexia is the difficulty with being able to read. Dyscalculia is a fear or a hatred of mathematics. And I think this fear and hatred of mathematics isn't due to maths itself. It's due to faulty and really bad mathematics teaching. If we can discover the joy of maths again and apply it to the different parts of our life, our projects will run much more smoothly. I hope that answers your question. Right.
John, we have here a question from Amanda. She wrote in the chat. Say, hi, John. I have a doubt regarding the results of the force field. Why do we calculate the value initially from -10 to +10 and then adjust it to 0 to 20? I didn't understand the nature of these values.
Ah, yes. What you find is, if you can imagine what we do in the force field in Dragon Dreaming, we set up the force field as a physical space in which one side of the force field is the most positive force you can imagine. And the other side of the force field is the most negative force you can imagine. The biggest hindrance to your project. So that creates the extremes. And just to help it, what we do is we scale those between 0 and 10. But the way in which we do it in Dragon Dreaming, unlike the way in which Kurt Lewin did it in 1946, what we do is we give people post-it notes. And as they walk backwards and forwards from one extreme to the other, what will happen is that they will find a position somewhere between the most positive to the most negative. They'll find a position where some idea will spring into their mind, an aha moment. And what happens when that happens is they write that on the post-it note and post it to the floor. And everybody does this backwards and forwards for about anything between 15 to 20 minutes, maybe a bit longer, maybe a bit shorter, depending upon how many people are there. And then what you find is as people then come together, they walk the force field. And what they'll find is that different people will give different scores to different factors on the force field. For example, lack of finance might be a negative factor, a really strong negative factor for one person, but it's a negative factor not so crucial for another person. And so what you do is you look at when you're mapping the force field, you look at the same factors and look at the range that happens between positive and negative. And you can score those factors. So if there's someone who says this is the positive one for that one, and that's the less positive one for that one, the average is somewhere in the middle. And so you score it as the average. And if you add up all those scores, the positive scores, and add up all the negative scores and subtract the negative from the positive, it will show you whether this is a project that has major impediments that need to be overcome, or if this is a project that the environment will actually conspire to help it occur. Once you've done that and you've examined the nature of both the environment and the individual factors involved, because both will be laid out in the force field, you can then go back over those forces and say, which of these could we change? Is there some of these forces that we could make, in fact, even more positive to move it closer to 10? Is there some of these factors that we can make less negative and move it closer to 0, or even shift it from being a negative factor into having a positive outcome? What you'll find is that there are some factors, both the individual factors and the environmental factors, that cannot be shifted, that are stuck. They're stuck in the environment. They're stuck in the force field. They can't be reduced. They can't be eliminated. They can't be altered. But there's some that can. And those that can, those are the important ones that you bring into your strategy, because the strategy aims to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, as I said. The arbitrary boundaries between the most positive and the most negative that you can think of, to give it a score so that we are able to compare the different factors. That's the reason for why we look at it between plus and minus, between plus 10 on one side of the extreme and minus 10 on the other. But it's just an artificial boundary. It's trying to give some way of being able to say, oh, that's a really negative one, or that's a really positive one. Understand? Does that answer the question?
Let's see if the Amanda right here. Yes, thank you. We have another question from Julian from France. Hi, John. Could you tell us more about the mathematics of Carabert?
Okay. Let me just have a look for a moment. The mathematics of the Carabert. Okay. The mathematics of a Carabert. Carabert comes from a mathematical structure that was originally called the critical path method, or the CPM. If you're interested in looking at critical path method, there's research being done by James Kelley and Morgan Walker, which was an adaptation from another system called PERT, Program Evaluation and Review Technique. This was a process that the US Navy used, and it was used by the Manhattan Project in the building of the first atomic bomb. And it was also used by the United States space program to put a man on the moon. Now, in Dragon Dreaming, the Carabert is a consensual process adapting a series of gatherings or nodes in organizing a series between 24 and 48 different tasks or activities that can be organized into song lines or lineages that are necessary to make the project successful. As I say, every project is a project of a story, and there are multiple song lines through every project. And the critical song line is the song line through the project that's going to take the longest. So what we find is that the changes in the task over the changes in time is a function of a nonlinear equation where expressions on the right-hand side describe the internal self-dynamics for each task, and the more complex looking terms on the right describe the lineages or linkages between all the components. So what I suggest you do is to get that reference that I mentioned, those references, James Kelley or Morgan Walker. You can actually go into Wikipedia under critical path method, and they will give you the formula there. And that formula can then look at what happens is that there's 3 different kinds of perturbation that can happen in a Carabert. One is the loss of the node. The node is the Kalap board, the meeting where people come together to work together on a particular task. This node loss is when a task is important, but it's not done. The second kind of perturbation, if you like, is when a link between different tasks breaks. This could be equivalent to a person leaving a project or not fulfilling an individual task. It's the links that feed into the tasks and the links that feed out of the tasks that are important in the Carabert. And the other perturbation is when a Carabert, when the factors in the force field that hinder the Carabert or the factors that help a Carabert are reduced, then that is another way in which Carabert can be perturbed and not be done. So what we find is that the Carabert works as a 2-dimensional structure of building the resilience into the project. And it can show you how resilient or fragile a particular network is in relation to those particular perturbations. And at which point would the system collapse? It's when the system collapses that the project becomes impossible. The conclusion that people have shown from multiple examples is, despite all of this multidimensionality and the perturbations in complex systems, when we plot this parameter, a common universal pattern of network resilience can be discovered. The intrinsic behavior of the components and their interactions, which affect the structure of the network, determine which acts and how strongly or how resilient the system is. And it becomes possible then to discover empirically the degree to which perturbations can cause cells in the body to die, or projects to collapse, or social systems to disappear, or ecosystems to be destroyed, or even whole civilizations to disappear and collapse too. It's in relation to the fragility of systems, and that can be mapped. There's a book by Joseph Tainter called The Collapse of Complex Societies. It's interesting that we have on this planet had 31 different civilizations. A civilization is a culture in which people live in cities. It comes from the Latin word civilis. And we've had 31. There is now one left, because all of those civilizations, they're sustainable only if they survive. And the reason why is that those civilizations have produced complex hierarchies, triangular systems like this, where you've got an elite at the top and you've got the bulk of people at the bottom. This system is only sustainable if it continues to grow, because only if it continues to grow does social mobility begin to be possible. That the people at the bottom aspire to becoming people a little bit higher, and the people higher aspire to becoming elite. And that's only possible if the system gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If the system stops getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then the system begins to destroy itself. And we today have arrived at the time in which there is only one global civilization left on the planet. Hello, people. We've got people in California. I'm sitting here in Western Australia. We've got people of the whole planet participating here. And that system has grown as big as it can. It cannot grow any bigger. And so what we need to do is we need to learn how to create a post-civilized culture, a civilization, a culture that is as different from conventional civilization as conventional civilization was from the pre-civilized cultures that went before it. You see, we have at the moment 1% of the population, the elite at the top of the pyramid, who have a wealth greater than 99% of the rest of the population. That's the way the world is organized at the moment, and that is not sustainable. So welcome to the turning point in the history of civilization. That's where we are. And the mathematics that I've been talking about helps us to build that post-civilized culture. Thank you for your question, Julie, I hope I've answered it a bit for you.
John, Louise asked for you to write the names of these two people from Critical Path Method. Could you write in the chat, please? The names?
Yes, I will. Just a moment. Let me grab that for you.
Then we have some questions here. I read because when we record the chat, will not go to the recorded.
Actually, what I can do, okay, here, just a moment, I'll put it in the chat for you. That's one.
Good. Could I read the next question?
I'm just trying to get the second reference on critical path. Just a moment. Oh dear. There's the next one.
Okay. Next question is from Ronald Sistek from Chile. He said, hello, dear one. I would love to ask John to share a little about the sustainability curve for the nature of change and the relationship between growth and flourish phases. I have opened here, John, the graphic. If you want, I can share for people to see.
Yes.
Or you will just explain, tell me what's better.
Well, you open the graph and I can talk to the graph.
Okay. Just a second. Here.
Oh.
This one?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Now, Ronald, it's good to see you, good man. It's been a long time since we've been in Santiago. This is the graphs for the process of change. Now, I want you to start with focusing just on the blue curve. And you see that time proceeds from right to left. So the earlier time is right on the right, and the end time is right on the left.
Just a second. I put to
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, just that one for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you see that what happens at the beginning of the project, there's a long period of time in which not much seems to be happening. This is the approach stage. And the approach stage is, just before you go, the approach stage happens that you hear about the project, you think, gee, that's a good project, but you do nothing about it. Now, eventually, what happens in that approach stage, is a process of seduction.
2 seconds, John. There is people with microphone open. Okay. Please, people, could you mute your microphone? Yes.
Yeah, what happens is that you might meet someone who reminds you of that project that you heard about. And you think, yes, I was going to do something about that. But you keep getting reminded. And so what happens is, as that happens, is that it begins to go faster and faster, and visible change begins to occur. Now, eventually, you'll get halfway to the sustainable level. Now, at that halfway point, it is important that the amount of change, which is a positive feedback on the left-hand side, is replaced by a negative feedback change, which is the change on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. And you'll see that the amount of change on the right-hand side begins to decline. The acceleration begins to go slower until it reaches the level that is sustainable for the project. Okay, Liz, could you play the next one?
Yeah.
There is the amount of work that is required to produce a sustainable project. Now, what happens is that amount of work that grows, it grows and grows and grows and grows until it reaches its peak at the point of inflection, which is that blue dot at the center. Now, the problem is, if you look at where that curve is crossing the black line, the amount of work in the early stages of the project is greater than the results that you see. The results that you see is the blue curve. The red curve is the amount of work that needs to be done. And so in the first half of the project, the amount of work that needs to be done is greater than the results you will see. Now, the problem is, and the reason why we get into overshoot and collapse and many projects collapse, is when you reach the point of inflection, you see that the amount of work being done required is at its peak. But people see that the project's only halfway through and they think, oh, we need to work twice as hard to achieve the sustainable level. But what you really should recognize is that when you get closer and closer and closer to sustainability, the amount of work required will actually fall. And at the sustainable level, the amount of work you need to do to keep the project working should be back to a minimum. Now, the third curve is, this is the work done. And what we find is that black line, just a moment, can you go back one, Liz? That black line is the line of zero motivation. On the top of that line is positive motivation. Underneath that line is negative motivation. And so you see that there's the 4 steps on the beginning of the project: the approach stage, the seduction stage. The engagement stage is when you say, yes, I'm in the project, count on me. And after that, there is a honeymoon stage. The honeymoon stage is when all problems seem instantaneously to disappear and people are really happy with the project. That's the honeymoon stage. But what happens is that is an overshoot and it will collapse. Okay, Liz, the next one. And the collapse goes in these 4 steps, as I said. At first, the collapse is people deny that there's a collapse happening. They think they're still in the honeymoon stage. They're not aware of motivation falling. But eventually they begin to be aware of the fall in motivation and compromises begin to be made. It means that you won't get all of your dreams and they won't get all of their dreams. And that's the beginning of a stage where people, they over-dramatize what they're giving up in order to get the other people to give up more. And that is a process of win-lose, not win-win. And so the compromise stage actually falls back until you get a crossover. And the crossover can happen at the time of inflection, where you get the freeze, fight, and flight that I mentioned, with the possibility of really low motivation being depression. Now, what happens? We cannot maintain depression for long periods of time. Liz, the next part, please. What happens in the depression is we can recover from the depression, and finally there's a transformation process that happens where we realize, hey, Ronald isn't such a bad guy after all. And hey, look, we did have some fun on the way. So that is the tendency for a normal project. But what I believe that we need to do is in the denial stage, when we become aware that the project is being denied. Liz, the next one. We need to, the celebration stage, as I said, had a recovery and a transformation stage. But when we realize the denial, okay.
Yeah, it's the graphic. Do you want to continue with this PowerPoint?
Yes, well, as soon as we reach the denial, if we can get into the celebration stage then, what can happen is that that recovery and the transformation stages can happen at the end of the denial. And so what we're able to do is build permanent high motivation that's sustainable for the whole of the project. Maybe that's on the next slide, Liz. There it is. If we celebrate then, we can maintain high motivation at a sustainable level. And then the project will proceed much better. I hope that that answers your question, Ronald.
Yes, of course. Sorry, so beautiful to see you after so many years. It would be so nice if you can share just a little bit about that beautiful formula where you define the sustainability curve and the two strategies, the R and the K. Just
yeah. I'll write it in the chat.
Uh-huh.
There's the mathematical formula there. And I've got 0 at the end. It's not a 0. That should be closing the brackets. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'll copy it again.
Yes,
And
copy
I'll
again.
explain.
Is this one you sent just for me?
There,
Okay. There.
Now, what that formula means is dn is the change in n. N is the position along that curve, the blue curve. The change in n divided by the change in time. That's dn divided by dt. The change in n divided by the change in time is equal to n at the previous time. That's the 1 minus t. So it's the change in n is equal to the change at the previous time times r. R is the rate of change. It's how quickly that curve is going up. Now, if it was just n times r, that would produce an overshoot and collapse curve. That 1 minus n over k is what makes the negative feedback curve. Now, what that means is that as n gets closer to k, k is the carrying capacity of the environment. K is the sustainability level. It comes from the German word Kapazität, which means the sustainability. As it gets closer and closer to that sustainable level, then n and k get closer and closer to each other. And so you get 1 minus 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. And when you multiply anything by 0, the answer is no change. So that's why that position is sustainable. And that curve and that mathematical formula is the mathematical formula for life itself. What happens is you grow fastest as a child. When you get to adolescence, the speed of your growth slows down and it hits the sustainable level. And you then become able to sustain your height for most of your life. What happens is, though, for us, we have finite lifespans. And so the curve that goes up like this comes down, and then it becomes recycled, and so it can create the infinity sign. And that infinity sign is what happens with trees in a forest. It's what happens with fish in a school of fish. It's what happens with life itself. So that curve, that formula that I've written out there, is actually the formula for living things. But it's also the formula for sustainable projects. Thank you, Ronald. I hope that helps.
Great, John. We have another question here from Eva and Julia. They asked, "Hi, can you give an example of the negative spiral? And have you created formulas for positive and negative spirals?"
If you look at the session on blockages that I spoke about, where you don't see what you're doing, you don't say what you're thinking, you don't do what you say, that creates the negative spiral. And there is a workshop that actually Liz was crucial in helping to create about the nature of that negative spiral, the nature of the blockage. There is some notes available on the symptoms that happen in each of those stages. For example, in the dreaming stage, the negative spiral there is where you are not aware and you become demotivated. And instead of gathering information, there is misinformation. So that would be the nature of the negative spiral in the dreaming stage. In the planning stage, the negative spiral is where you don't see the alternatives. You don't consider the alternatives. You think there's only one alternative. Instead of the designing of a strategy, it's when you get coercion, where people try to manipulate other people into getting what they want. And in the testing stage, it's when you avoid taking risks, because testing your project is always risky. And if you avoid taking risks, then you're not going to get accurate information about the nature of the strategy. And so you won't be able to reconsider the alternatives and make your project even better. What you find is the negative spiral. The factors that are involved in the negative spiral tend to be the factors that are found in the O'Hare, and I'll give you the reference here. If you check out that name, particularly in terms of the inventory of psychopathy, it's the nature of psychopathic or toxic leadership. And that creates and perpetuates a negative cycle. It's interesting that psychopaths, they have found, are about 3% of the population. Thank goodness. Only about 3% of the population are psychopaths. But from the research that has been done, it seems that 30% of politicians are psychopaths. And 30% of CEOs of major corporations are psychopaths. So we have a culture at the moment that seems to promote people into psychopathic leadership. What we found, what studies of pre-civilized cultures before they built these pyramids, big pyramids I was talking about earlier on, those cultures were not ruled by psychopaths. And the reason why is because they had ways of dealing with psychopaths. And the ways they dealt with psychopaths was twofold. One way of dealing with psychopaths, and psychopaths hate this, is to be ridiculed. The other thing about psychopaths is that to exclude the psychopaths from the community, just exclude them. Aboriginal people used to do that if there was a psychopath getting in control. But unfortunately, unfortunately, at the moment, what we see in Russia is that Russia is ruled by a psychopath. And it's going to take to end the war with Ukraine to get rid of that psychopath who's at the moment leading them into war. Because psychopaths are toxic, they are destructive, and it leads to a destructive cycle. Does that answer your question?
There is another part of the question is, are there formulas for positive and negative spirals?
Yes, there are. But the way to do that is to look at living systems theory, because they talk about, if you go into research, Fritjof Capra's book on the web of life presents the formula. And that's a really useful resource for people who want to explore that in more depth. And there are formula for it. It's just I don't have it off the top of my head.
It's a
Thank
famous
you so
book.
much.
Thank you so much. And also you talked about it in the question before. Kind of.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks.
So Faria Ann asking, wondering how this metaphor of the romantic relationship might be affected by using a polyamorous relationship instead of a monogamous model. As it appears to me, monogamy seems to be a linchpin of hierarchical society. Let's do this.
Well, one of the things I say in Dragon Dreaming is unconditional love in action. Now, what is unconditional love? There's an article that was written in 1942 by Clive Staples Lewis. This was written in 1942, and he wrote a book called The Four Loves, or an essay called The Four Loves. And he said that the concept of love in English is really deficient because we have just one word. And he said, in fact, Greek is much superior to English in understanding the nature of love. Because whereas we use one word for love, ancient Greeks used 4 different words. The first form of love, he said, was storge. And storge can be translated as affection. And affection, he suggests, was the basis of all love. But you can have affection for a dog or a cat. You can have affection for a place. You know, you can feel affectionate about a place in there. So storge is the basis for love, but it is conditional. It's not unconditional. And the nature of unconditional love is not storge, but unconditional love is partly based on storge. The second kind of love, according to C.S. Lewis, was philia. Now, philia, he says, the sort of love that exists between brothers or between good friends. Affiliation is linked to philia. It's based on storge, but it is still conditional. It is still conditional love. And then he said that there's a third form of love, which C.S. Lewis said is eros. It's an erotic love. And the nature of eros, erotic love, is love between men and women, or between men and men can have a philia, or gay love can be erotic too. But the interesting thing C.S. Lewis said is even erotic love is conditional. It's not yet unconditional. And C.S. Lewis said there is one form of love that he said he called agape in Greek. And agape, he said, is divine love, and that is unconditional. Now, for a long time, when I was talking about dragon dreaming as being unconditional love in action, I quoted C.S. Lewis, until I met a marvelous man in Slovenia called Nara Petrovic. And Nara is an interesting person because he has translated all of the Sanskrit holy texts of Hinduism into Slovenian. And Nara told me, he said, you know, John, you've left out one. And I said, I've left out one. He says, no, you've left out two. He said, you've left out parental love, maternal or paternal love. And he said that if you look at parental love, at the start of parental love, it is generally unconditional. That parental love is usually unconditional, but it can become conditional over the course of a lifetime. Parents put demands on their children, or the children put demands on the parents, and then it can become conditional. But he said that there is also another unconditional love, which in Sanskrit is called prema karma. And prema karma, that agape, divine love, in C.S. Lewis's essay, depends on your definition of the divinity. It depends on how you see the nature of the divine. So that is conditional. And he said that prema karma is a form of love that exists, that it is more unconditional than divine love, because it is not dependent on the nature of the divinity. And I thought, yes, Nara, you're a smart fellow. There's two more kinds of love. You are right. There are, in fact, 6. And then what happened was I discovered a 7th form of love. And the 7th form of love, when we talk about love, there is the lover and the beloved and the process of loving that connects the two. And so when we talk about love, we are putting love into language. But I believe that there is a form of unconditional love that is independent of all language, that exists outside of language. And maybe it's that kind of love that is outside of language that is truly unconditional, because it's not being fitted into the conditions of language. Now, that is more than you're probably wanting to hear about monogamy and polyamory and all of that too. But it's an exploration. If you say dragon dreaming is unconditional love in action, then you have to basically look at what is this thing called unconditional love, and hence the discussion that I've just shared with you. But C.S. Lewis's essay is very good if you can get a chance to read it. Thank you.
I'm not seeing another questions here. So if someone wants to make some comments, or if we have another question, we have more 10 minutes. Or maybe you, John, can give your last words.
Yes. I look at the people who are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
30.
30. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, Liz, because you've taken photos of everyone before in this, so perhaps we can have a photo of everyone who's listening in on this discussion.
Yeah, let's do that. Who wants to appear in the picture?
Yes, you'll have to put your camera on to appear in the picture.
Again. Another one. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And good luck with your projects. You know, the thing is about Dragon Dreaming, one thing I say, Dragon Dreaming was created as a way of running successful projects. And I really think there's another good book called, I'll give you the rest. Blessed Unrest. It says that at the moment, there is a huge international conspiracy. It's a positive conspiracy because what they say in Blessed Unrest, it's the way in which the planet is waking up. And it's waking up, it's activating the immune system of life itself. The immune system of life itself to heal itself. And we are a part of that. You are a part of that. All the projects you are doing is a part of the immune system of life itself waking up to heal itself. Now, I don't know if any of your projects are going to be the project that makes the biggest difference. But maybe if we can create enough critical mass, there'll be some little project somewhere that stimulates other things, or different parts of different projects will come together to synthesize a way of being. And that way of being will bring about the great turning. It's a project that is like this. It's a project of the holding actions in defense of the earth. It's a project like this. It's a project of the head of building the new institutions that are necessary for sustainability. But those two are not enough. It needs this too, the heart. And it's the heart that keeps the project to be of the highest possible values. So it's the head, the heart, and the hands together that are going to build the sustainable post-civilized culture that we need at the moment, I believe. So congratulations, all of you, and good luck with your projects. Thank you.
John, people ask for you write the name of the book, please, in the chat.
Yes, I have. I thought I did.
I take the opportunity to invite people for the wonderful sessions we have today. We have in Spanish, Before the Sun. We have Daniela talking about practice of dragon dreaming, also in Spanish. Ileana talking about the closing the feedback loop in English, and the Italian dragon dreaming anthroposophy. And I would like to invite you too for our guest session on 7 October. It's with Manish Jain, a very interesting person, talk about future of education, and he has an interesting project in India. Will be 7th October, tomorrow. Okay, and also tomorrow there is wonderful sessions, and 8th too, and we've closed the Confestival 9th October, the same time today, 9 o'clock a.m. in Brazil, 2 o'clock Europe, and John will be 8 p.m. for you, this traditional time. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to be part of this great Confestival. And thank you for the exchange in the chat. It was really beautiful.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Bye. What a beautiful way to start
Thanks.
my morning.
Thank you so much.
Tchau, tchau.
Love you all.
Obrigado.
Now,
see
have a
people.
good day, good evening. Bye bye.